The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Kim Westlund is an entrepreneur, speaker, moderator, and podcast host who is focused on connecting people with their purpose and helping them tell their unique life and business story. Kim and I have been good friends for many years, and our time together always consists of expansive conversations about life, relationships, and especially purposeful work. One reason I love chatting with Kim is her ability to bring meaningful insights to tough challenges, thanks to her diverse career and leadership roles that have spanned over 30 years. Kim gained recognition as a leader in business communities throughout Alberta, facilitating impactful panel discussions with entrepreneurs to better understand their roadmap through struggle to find success. Kim has faced challenging years and hard circumstances in her life, but she is using her story to fuel inspiration for others to also find their voice and share their unique story. Our conversation in this episode centered around the value of a good story and the impact it has on those listening in. But Kim, being Kim, took it a layer deeper by sharing a bit of her own story and her insatiable drive to help others articulate their own story and find the courage to share it. Well, welcome everyone back to the Connector Next Door, and I have a special next door neighbor here in Calgary, a good friend of mine, Kim Westlund. I'm so glad that you're here today to talk about what connection means to you. We have all sorts of conversations, but I don't know that I have heard from you specifically about what connection means to you, so I'm excited to get started today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I am so excited to be on your podcast today.
I know that you and I have had conversations in the past where you have talked about your love for hospitality, your love to have people in your home and for them to feel welcome and for things to look beautiful and just that they leave with this great feeling once they've had time in your home and in the discussions and the fun and the laughs that you've had in some of those situations. And I am excited to jump in. I think when we talk about connection, I think sometimes we forget how simple it can be, but I have never heard from you what connection actually means to you. Do you want to share a little bit with our listeners what that actually means to you?
I would love to talk about that because I don't think I've ever been asked this question, for starters, and it's such a huge part of my life. You are absolutely correct. I feel like I am a natural connector in a lot of ways. And I really believe from a big picture perspective that we were all created for connection. I think it's just part of who we are as human beings. I think it's ingrained in us. And for me personally, connection really helps me to get outside of myself. And it helps me to see things from a different perspective. And it really creates, when I'm connecting with somebody, I think it really helps, that energy that bubbles up, and there's a spark there that happens when I connect. And it helps me to really, at least I have found, have a deep empathy and an understanding on a greater level for others when I'm connecting. And, I like to think of it like this. I see a lot of things kind of almost like one big body. When you think about a body, we all, if we think about our own individual part, we're all maybe one part of that body. And we all have a part to play. And, so I'm thinking, if I'm an arm in the body, what does that mean if, I'm not connected to the shoulder? If there's a disconnect there, I'm not going to function the way that I'm designed to function. So, I'm a very visual person, so I think of it in these terms. An arm connected to a shoulder, to your chest, and you think all of that connected together creates synergy, and it creates how you're then operating the way you were created to be. And so I think of it like that, and we all have a part to play.
I have the song in my head, the knee bones connected to the...
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
You can sing that along with it. But yeah, if we connect the dots, it creates a full picture. And so, that's how I kind of see connection. And it really builds trust with people.
I love what you're saying here about we need each other. And it's not just in a nice to have, it's in a have to have kind of sense.
Yes.
Because you can't make it. The tips of the fingers can't work without the rest of the hand. And my daughter is actually studying to be a podorthist. I had to look it up when she said she was going to go into school to do that. But it's basically where you study the foot and all of the movements of the foot. And eventually she can be helping people with orthotics and with their movement if they're in elite sports, that kind of thing. But it's really fascinating when she's right in the middle of it when I go visit her, and she's got her textbook there. But how everything is so intricately working together so that the whole body is functioning well, which is a little bit, I think, what you're saying here, just this idea of really having, that there's more to it than just me and what I want in the world, and I'm setting my goals, all those things, but we need others.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, Lisa. You probably just said it a little nicer than I did, but yes, those connections, those pieces, those body parts that work together are absolutely essential. We cannot exist. Me being an arm out in the world all on my own, I'm not sure what an arm can do on its own, but it needs to be connected to the entire body. And for all of these things to work together, it's absolutely critical for success. So yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's amazing. And I see it in your work life and in your home life and just in so many aspects of where you show up in the world. And we are in the same city here. So physically, we used to go to some of the same networking groups and kind of hang out, in some of the same places. And even watching you work the room, as we used to say, where you are looking for people where there is that spark, that you are seeing sort of something light up in the other person. And I think even as we were getting to know each other and you were getting to know a little bit more about my business and what I did, and you were introducing me to people, and in a way where I felt like I was seen, in a way that I felt like she saw what I could offer or what I was trying to bring to the world. And then you would introduce the other person with as much grace and spark as anyone. And I think that when we start to think about seeing those connections, and you are a natural connector, you're somebody that just does that naturally. Is that something that you've seen throughout your life, wanting others to know each other in the same way? Or is that something that you learned through your professional career?
I think it's evolved over time, but I do believe that this started very, very early on for me. At a young age, I really sought out connection, I think more so through experience at that point. I would, thinking back, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' farm. And I remember, like, my immediate memory when you ask that question is, I would spend an entire afternoon setting up cards in the living room, kind of like dominoes. And I would take like decks and decks and decks of cards. It would take me hours. And I would set them up in this long train and intricate path. And then I would gather everybody together. And I would create this whole experience out of, look at this, look at what has been created here, and I would just revel in their response to it, and watch their faces, and as we would watch them all fall in sequence. And it might seem like a silly thing, but those are the kinds of things that I really enjoyed as a kid. That's just one example, and the other thing I would say there is, that really reflects what I'm doing today, is that storytelling piece. My grandparents, all immigrants, would tell stories of how they came to Canada. And I remember just sitting there listening for hours, and I never tired of it. Like, it was not something where I just, had to get up, after, 5 or 10 minutes and go, okay, well, I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to go play now. I would just listen and listen and listen. And I would just be fascinated. And now, it's interesting now because my daughter is learning Ukrainian. So part of my family is Ukrainian. And now she's kind of taking this into her world too. So it's kind of a neat journey that I'm seeing, connecting the dots there just from having such an interest in that and kind of passing it along. So that's kind of what I remember growing up and connecting to those important pieces.
Well, you know what's really interesting about what you're saying? So the first example that you gave, where you were creating something and you were probably incredibly focused and took the time, when you're putting all these together, and it wasn't enough for you to just see the thing, kind of do its thing and fall apart the way that it does, magically. But to bring other people into that experience. When you start bringing people into that experience, it actually has a different element or a heightened sense of connection when you're actually having that experience and the fun with other people. And I think having, even in the storytelling piece, that the story is something that we tell, or many cultures are known for their storytelling. But the story is really only as good, or the storyteller, as the people sitting and listening to the story, and maybe even engaging. I've heard some great storytellers where they're engaging the listeners in what that story means, to the point where, like you were saying, that over time, those stories continue from generation to generation to generation. And you as a storyteller are not just the talking head, where you're telling a story, but I know you well enough that you're bringing people into that experience. Now you've become not only a storyteller, but you are somebody that is helping people find their story, learn to articulate their story, to then tell their story. And how amazing would it be for others to start to tell their stories, in the sense of business owners that you work with or entrepreneurs that you work with, that others start to understand the story well enough that they can share it with others. Tell us a little bit about your work as a storyteller and how you are trying to awaken that storytelling sort of part in many people that are willing to go there. It's not an easy thing, but how are you kind of shaping that into the work that you do today?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different streams that I have in my business currently. And one is a podcast called The Business B-Side. And just for our younger listeners, a B-side for me, and I always like to kind of explain what a B-side is. A B-side for me is, I grew up listening to vinyl, and there was always an A-side and a B-side. And the A side of the vinyl was about, that was usually the popular song, the chart topper, the song that you heard on the radio, and those were great. But when you flipped it over to the B side for me really represented a different side of the artist. The artist would maybe have a little bit of an edgier approach to some of those cuts. It would be something that they took risks with, and they would put out there to kind of test the waters and see what the response would be. But it was more of to me, a lot of times, a real and raw version of the music that they were putting out. So when I think about the podcast that I've started, it's about that. It's about connecting with the real and raw stories of entrepreneurs and business owners, and kind of the story behind the story. So, on that note, I'm connecting through conversation, and I have been for many years, but I would say that that's really powerfully what I'm doing with this podcast. And it's the power of a story. And these stories are really to connect with those out there, to give hope and fuel to their own stories. So they're not meant to just be shared from the person sharing, but they're meant to connect with the listener in a powerful way, where that person can then maybe see hope in their own situation. Entrepreneurs are going through, they've always gone through tough times, but they have ebbs and flows and ups and downs. And sometimes you just need to hear a powerful story of somebody sharing struggle, and somebody sharing what's really happening, and uncovering some of the raw conversation of their lives. And sometimes that's all it takes for somebody to grab hold of and go, I can do that too. That's something, if that person can do it, then I can do it. So, even in my own story, I was at a really dark place in my life years ago, going through a very difficult time personally. And I needed other people's stories to be able to grab hold of and connect with for hope in my own life. So the power of storytelling and sharing is just essential in as far as I'm concerned. And the other piece of that I am working on today is through my company, Channel One Productions. And it's mostly a coaching and crafting stories company, however you want to define that. But it's really, again, it's about connecting with folks who are wanting change and wanting to connect to something bigger for their lives. And so, again, it's through conversation, it's through exploring personal story and uncovering where they've been, and then maybe creating a new story as to where they're going. So those are the areas that I've really identified that I have passion for, that I've injected in my business, and I'm really, really excited to be doing today.
You're giving me a different perspective on storytelling, because there is not just the craft of telling stories. And this was something in my nonprofit world. So when I was doing more donor development, and we were doing, marketing materials, communication materials for a nonprofit. And this was something that was always top of mind for us, to tell a great story, to, find one person. How was their life changed through the services that we offered? The difference, and I think where the conversation might have stopped, is how the listener can interact with that story, how the listener is going to be changed by that story beyond just giving money. We would do a lot of tracking, kind of what that ROI was on a mailing or on some kind of campaign. Telling a good story makes a financial difference, and I think business owners know that as well. But what you're saying is so much deeper, and I think probably way more valuable, in the sense that a storyteller is imparting something for the next generation. A storyteller is giving the people coming behind them that look into maybe what it has been for them to go through and create what they've created. Maybe the storyteller is opening that window to possibilities that somebody hasn't quite lived. And so the story is giving them that, just the light, the spotlight on something that's possible. Are you seeing in the people that you're supporting through your coaching, are you seeing some of those light bulbs go on where they're saying, oh yeah, this actually will have a bigger impact? And maybe even through your own story, sharing your own story, how people are saying, oh, she's been there. I can be there too, or I can take that next step, or I could create something different for my life where I could actually have something more meaningful and even create a business, or whatever it is that they're looking for, that evidence that it's possible. Are you seeing some of those already success stories where it might not be the full, they've got it and they've moved something, over the finish line, but they're able to take the next step?
Yes, absolutely. You said something really critical there, and you said connections are maybe about possibilities. And when I connect with clients, when I connect with, even folks at an event that I've put together, part of this is getting people in the same room, or, talking with my client, and we start, but we don't know what the end result is going to be. So this is about getting people in the same room, starting a conversation, and then seeing what happens. For me, it's about, starting the process, but being hopeful about the outcome, but not knowing. And for me, that's a huge part of the excitement, because it's kind of like building blocks. You start at the bottom, you kind of have an idea where things can go, but as you're moving along and you're layering on ideas and collaborations and partners and conversation and that's how I love blue sky conversations, because you start somewhere but you don't know where you're going to go. And that to me is really part of the excitement about what I'm doing, is that just that, we start a conversation and we just open ourselves up to possibilities of where it can go. And for me, that's the richness of what I am working on.
When we started, we talked about you as a hostess and you really having the, I call it radical hospitality gene, bug, whatever it is, it's always good. But where you are welcoming people, and you haven't had the chance to do that as much in the last 2 years, but really having the end unknown. And as we're telling stories, isn't that part, like we could all go on Google and learn all sorts of things. But the difference of a group of people in your home where there's an ebb and there's a flow, and you always know when a story's being told, people will quiet down and listen in. Yeah. And you can tell on their faces that this is either interesting or they can't believe it or something, moving, that lends itself to the connection with everyone in the group. So everyone's having that collective experience. Even if you're not the storyteller, that you are part of that. And you said a little bit at the beginning as well about what connection meant to you. So the hand needs the arm, needs the knee, needs the brain, that really we are one body, and everyone needs to be showing up for each other for this to be working. Do you see that your storytelling coaching is where all of the elements have to be at play at the same time?
Yes, absolutely. I guess another way of looking at this would be that I'm looking for gaps in connection. I think sometimes I'm looking for, what's missing here? How can I help fill that void?
Interesting.
For example, if I think about, I have a friend who is starting a business, and she's looking for the right expert connections. And these are gaps in her business. And this is just a simple example, but it kind of lends itself to be able to picture how this works. So, us connecting, us sharing, me understanding on a deeper level what she's trying to achieve through her business, I'm then able to, through my own connections, feed into her business through what I can supply. And if I don't know, I've actually passed along that to others. So all of a sudden it just grows. It grows and grows and grows from me knowing that and having that conversation. All of a sudden, it spreads out and a whole network is tapped into to be able to fill the gap for her to be successful in her own business. That's just, one example of the power of connection. And I actually have one other one. It comes to mind. I have another friend, and this is just the impact of the connections that we make and the power. I connected with a coffee company here in Calgary, and they have just an incredible story. And I was just randomly one day sharing with a friend this impactful story and this company that I had come across. And in sharing that story with my friend, she went ahead and connected with that company, and she now volunteers her time with that company at a time where they need volunteers, and they are at a critical point in their journey to be able to move forward. I didn't know about this until later on. So it just reminded me about, sometimes we're not even aware of the impactful connections that we make and that we share out with others. We don't even see the impact sometimes right away of what we're sharing and how we're doing that, and until later on. And I was just so moved when she told me what she was doing. And I thought, well, that just came from a simple conversation. Just sharing another person's story impacted now her and the company in such a great way. So that to me is just so powerful.
That's beautiful. And when we talk about sort of the legacy of storytelling, that, you know, that there will be people that will adopt the story, or there might be a few twists and turns in that story, but that if it continues over and over again, and the idea of making that story intriguing, but yet simple and easy to translate and easy to share, can have such an incredible impact on somebody's life. When you talk about really the power of storytelling, and it can be this catalyst to more. And I know so much of your work is about sharing the story, but I also know that it's about really getting clear for ourselves on the stories that we tell ourselves, that we live through, that, you know, we really have to be at peace with where we're at, what our story tells us about ourselves. And I know even in the past few years that as you've gone through so many changes over this last year, especially, how your story is shifting and changing as well. And are you finding it harder now as you've kind of gone from more of a corporate world to this world of entrepreneurship, starting your own business? How do you think you'll tell that story? I know you have a daughter, but when you have grandchildren, or, you know, to the people in your life that might not be part of this part of your life, how do you think you might explain this last year to people and tell that part of the story?
Well, that's a great question. I think I've just, you know, how would I tell my story of this last year? Well, you know, it's like anything else in my life and the hard times that I have been through. I think it's about being authentic, and it's about just not framing it in a way that is, you know, hidden, but timing. You know, timing is critical to telling your story too. For many years, I wasn't ready to tell any part of my story. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed, and I wasn't ready, and I needed to heal, and I needed to get to a point where I was comfortable enough to take the next step. And that's with anything. I think timing is absolutely critical. And I think part of the power that I'm finding of telling my story is that there's healing and restoration that comes with telling your story and telling others' stories. And that's something that surprised me. I thought, oh my goodness, if I tell my story, is that going to bring up thoughts of shame and guilt and all those terrible things again, and just kind of revisit all of that? But actually, it's done just the opposite. It's actually been freeing me. It's the freedom has come with the fact that, you know what? That's a part of my past. It doesn't define who I am. It's something that happened to me, but it's not who I am today or who I choose to be. So I've kind of, you know, separated myself from, you know, identifying with the experience as who I am, but it's what happened. And so there's a freedom that comes with that. So I think, you know, having that perspective is really critical in terms of how you move forward and how you do share these things out. And I think that's what connects with folks. I think that's how, you know, people will connect with, you know, we all go through tough times. So to be able to hear that and to connect with that, I think is, again, very, very powerful. You know, I encourage everyone to visit that part of their life and think, you know, how do I talk about this? How do I share this? So that's really what it's all about to me.
And it's also something that you are helping clients with. So I love what you just explored with us, because it is possible to be telling our stories. And I love the idea of timing because sometimes we hide these parts of our story away thinking that we'll be judged, or there's going to be some other fallout, or people aren't going to take us seriously, or whatever it is that kind of plays in our mind when we start thinking about what our story means sort of in the big wide world. That caring for it carefully, sharing it carefully, I think is really important. And like you say, the timing is so important. And when we look at the gift it is to the people in our lives as we start to share parts of our story, depending on where a person is at, and depending what that relationship is, and where that connection is, sort of on the life of the connection. It really allows us, I think, to give that positive light to the, like we said earlier, to the people coming behind us. And for anyone that is out there trying to create a new program, or you are running an event, or you are working with a team, sometimes we also hide away some of those challenges that we have faced. And I know as event planners, you and I, Kim, are both in the event planning world in lots of different ways, or we have been, over the years. I used to feel like if I shared some of those harder times, some of the difficulties, some of the mess in the planning, that then people wouldn't take me seriously. Then they wouldn't rally around and help support a cause, or they would feel like, oh, everything is going to fall apart. The opposite actually started to be true when I started to share more of my story. And I know you have helped me do that over the years as well, where you're like, well, don't feel like you have to go there, but if you want to go there, it's possible. Yeah. So you've been that champion in my life. And as I started to not just craft a story, but like you say, authentically tell my story, parts of my story that might apply or might be an encouragement to somebody, the opposite actually started to be true, is that there was more opportunity to share what I did and why I do the work I do, why I'm so passionate about it, and why even through, almost 2 years of a global pandemic for events, that I'm more passionate than ever now to do the work that I do. I'd love to end our conversation today on what would that look like in a really broad sense. Because I know that you're passionate about this work. I know that storytelling matters to you. And anyone that listened to this whole podcast today will get that about who you are. If you could take that into a broader sense, if you could start seeing people tell great stories and hear and interact with great stories, how would that change our communities, do you think?
Well, I think first of all, when I think of the last couple of years, I really feel that we've taken connection for granted. I think we are now in a place where it feels very different. This pandemic has affected every single person on the planet, and that's unprecedented. And when I think about connection and what has happened, I just think that we are now facing a whole new opportunity in how we connect with the world. And I think instantly the world has become bigger to all of us. And I look at it as a possibility. I know there's a lot of hardship that has come from this pandemic, but I also think, again, it's perspectives. What can we glean from this pandemic in terms of connection? What kinds of conversations can we be now broadening and connecting with different parts of the world that maybe we just never, ever have been able to before? Or, it's kind of like that forced innovation. It's that forced, looking at things differently. The landscape has changed, and I think there's, things that we'll just never revisit. We'll never go backwards. We're now on a forward motion. And I think we need to figure this out for ourselves. And I think there's just a huge amount of opportunity for new partnerships, new collaborations on a much grander scale. I think in a lot of ways, maybe this is my very optimistic view that I tend to have, but I think if we tend to, on a broad scale, look at the world a little differently and with more empathy to what we have all been through, that we're going to experience a lot more peacefulness. It's easy to be judgmental from a distance.
Right.
But when you're connected to something, you see it from a different perspective. And we've all been through the same pandemic. Our experiences may have varied from country to country and even within our own communities and cities, but we've all experienced the same thing. So what an amazing connection point, right? Like that's just something that we now all have in common around the entire world. And when can we have ever said that in the past? I don't think we ever have been able to. So, you know, again, look at things in a brand new way. And that's something now that we can all take and move forward with and heal and restore and look at new ways of innovation and collaboration. That could be business and it could be life. You know, you could apply it to whatever you want to apply it to. You know, I also think of what happens, you know, when we're just connecting with like. You know, there's comfort and familiarity there, and we see things from a more comfortable perspective. But what happens when we're connecting and collaborating with different and beyond our boundaries of where we've ever gone before? You know, we may be a little bit uncomfortable in that, but growth happens. And that's where possibilities then become endless. So that's how I'm kind of choosing to see things moving forward in my own business, my own life and career. And again, I'm just kind of diving in. I'm not sure what the end result's going to be, just like I mentioned previously. But the point is that I think if we're putting one foot in front of the other and we're taking these chances and these risks to continue conversations and connecting in this way, that, you know, we'll have a part 2 of this and see where things go, which is exciting. Exactly.
Well, and even as you're describing this being a global connection point, and we talk about that a lot in Candy. So what a beautiful vision of everyone, and difficult for many people. But that's where some of the greatest art comes from. Some of the greatest music comes from. Some of the greatest stories come from the hardest times. And if we allow ourselves to go there and see it as this common connection point, but everyone's going to have their own story on how they have lived through or how they have managed or how they've grown through this time. And I'll encourage anyone out there that is looking on how to tell that story, you know, to your clients or even your event guests or to your partners. Reach out to Kim, because there's a process, and there can be the support of a coach like you, Kim. And even if that never makes it out to the public, even if it doesn't become sort of the New York Times bestseller, you know, list for January, when you tell your story, telling it for yourself, really getting clear on your story for yourself or parts of your story will serve you anyway. Will serve our community anyway. We will be better people for it. So thank you so much, Kim, for being here with me today. We've gone a couple of places that I haven't heard those answers before. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have gone through. It has been so inspiring this year. And then seeing where you're going to go for 2022. And like you said, I think earlier, we don't know where it's going to go. And that's part of the fun.
No, we don't.
So how can people get a hold of you? Where can they continue the conversation? Where can they find you to actually have you as their coach? What's the next step for them?
I think the easiest way is through my website, channel1.ca. I'm also on Instagram, Business B-Side, and Channel 1 Prod. And those are the easiest ways to find me. And I would love to connect with you. If I've not yet had the privilege of knowing what you do and how you are changing your own world, love to connect with you. And thank you so much, Lisa, for having me today.
It's been a fantastic conversation, and I know that the story will continue. There's more chapters to come. For those of you that are listening that are feeling a little bit stuck in your story, I will say that events as well are in another chapter. So be patient, take some time, give yourself a bit of space to find that story and have that courage to tell that story to someone else. Thanks so much, Kim. I so appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Lisa.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.